Hey everyone, welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the best in BC politics. Thank you so much for being here, whether you're watching on TV, Check Plus, YouTube, or you're subscribing on your favorite podcast feed. We appreciate you being here each and every week. It's a busy time in BC politics, and so we've got a lot of topics on the go. Slightly different panel this week because Jillian Oliver is away, and we're hoping to have her back soon. But we brought in a special new guest here, and I want to introduce him first. Jeff Ferrier is Senior Vice President of Hill and Knowlton, and he's joining us this week. Jeff, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, Rob. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here on the panel.
We're happy to have you. And of course, the other two panelists you know each and every week, but we'll introduce them as well. Maclean Kay, editor of the Orca. Hello, Maclean. Thanks for being here.
Always a pleasure.
And Katy Merrifield, Vice President at Wellington Advocacy. Hi, Katy.
Hi, Rob. Always a good time.
Always a good time. That's what I like to hear. We're going to jump into not a good time. The obvious massive story across the world in the last week, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the biggest news story, national, provincial, local governments across the world wondering what they can do to sanction Russia in some way, show their opposition to this and their support for the Ukrainian people. This extends to BC, where the government has done some things like pulling Russian liquor off of BC liquor store shelves, searched land title records for sanctioned Russian officials, and openly called for the divestment of Russian assets. So we're going to go around and talk a bit about what we make of the response, and do provinces like BC even have the scope or responsibility to get involved in responding to something like this? And if they do, has BC done enough on that front? Jeff, why don't we start with you on that question?
Sure. I think the public is demanding a response from the government. I'm struck by how supportive British Columbians are of Ukraine, how much they want for their government to take a stand. And I'd point out that it's quite a position of privilege that we're in British Columbia, that when we're talking about this, we're talking about pension governance and vodka off the shelves of liquor stores, and the people in the Ukraine don't have it. They're not so lucky. I think Ottawa has most of the levers, international relations, military, and trade and sanctions. But there are things that Premier Horgan has done that the opposition has called for, and credit to that for that on vodka, on BCI and divesting, and most importantly, opening British Columbia to refugees from Ukraine if that happens. I think those are all good things. I think those are all real things, and it's good to see the legislature united in support for those kinds of measures.
Yeah, certainly they were united, and they were also united, Katy, on another issue. All three parties coming out at one point earlier in the week on calling for BCI, as Jeff just mentioned, the Public Investment Corporation, to divest itself of its Russian assets and not profit on the war. It raised a kind of difficult political question because, as the Premier argued, politicians shouldn't maybe get their sticky little fingers into how investment decisions are made for $200 billion in public pension plans, like the teachers and government workers. But at the same time, there he was standing there saying, I'm not really happy with this. What did you make of kind of the politics of all of that and everything else that BC went through?
Yeah, so on the crass political side, to start it off, I do want to just talk about what this week was like for Kevin Falcon and the BC Liberals. And this is not a partisan take, but there's a couple of reasons why this was so significant for their party. Number one, there is a lot riding on Kevin Falcon as the new leader of the opposition. After a very fractious leadership race. Not only does he have to win over the hearts and minds of British Columbians, but he also has to revive the BC Liberal Party internally. And number two, it is really difficult for any opposition across the country to get the government to A, listen, and B, move on their requests. So the fact that Kevin first raised, pulling Russian vodka from the shelves, as well as BCI divesting itself from Russian investments, I think is such a significant win in just a week's time. And on the BCI divestment itself, I agree with the sentiment that it is, you want to be cautious having politicians interfere with investments such as this. But we know that war is the line, and expansionist Russia is the line. The threat to Western democracy is the line. And so I was pleased to see that BCI, after some shaky communications, finally did the right thing after their Alberta counterparts moved first.
Yeah, the Alberta movement with their public investment company and their CEO on Twitter expressing support to the Ukrainian people and divesting assets made BC's investment corporation look like a bunch of idiots for the early half of the week until they finally announced they were doing the same after this period of silence. So that was interesting. On the opposition issue, Maclean, sure, I think they had some points, but I also was struck by kind of some question periods in which they went on and on about this bizarre call for government to approve permitting for some sort of LNG facilities that haven't even made financial investment decisions to get natural gas to Europe while they're paused in the Russian gas market, as if you snap your fingers and suddenly there's a gigantic LNG plant exporting to Europe, which was never even something we were going to do. I lost the thread on that but maybe that's just the politics of how parties have to try and respond to something like this. What did you make of all that?
I mean, I don't need to tell anyone on the panel here about the theatrics of question period, and sometimes the questions being asked are more about sort of probing for what the answer might be and seeing what the government thinking is on various files. This is nothing new. It's going to continue beyond this issue, and we've seen it countless times before. So, I mean, the government's quite right in that you can't just make an LNG plant appear. But this government has also been reticent to issue permits on other things. It said it would empty the kitchen sink on TMX and other files like that. So it's worth asking the questions and seeing what the answers are. Did they score a significant win asking the questions? Probably not in this case, but that doesn't mean it wasn't worth asking.
I guess so. I thought they were kind of stupid questions, to be honest with you. Especially
Can I jump in on that, Rob?
Yeah.
Just to say, I think that where Kevin Falcon did really well this week was in asking serious questions about serious things the government could do to make a difference. And Ellis Ross, who asked most of these questions, and I've got a lot of time for him. I think he brings a lot of really important lived experience and perspective to the legislature. But this line of questioning was about as serious as a Carrot Top movie. It was just out of left field. It was completely, it was just the worst of unserious opposition. And I think if Mr. Falcon wants to reestablish that coalition, and his party is a serious contender, they need to be serious about big issues like industrial development in northwestern British Columbia.
Yeah. Well, some of them, I mean, it's like any question period. I guess some of the stuff lands, some of the stuff doesn't. It's a long half an hour.
That's true.
Not everything can be the investment corporation the whole time or Russian liquor. And then especially, I think, during this week in which the premier moved on a couple issues, he started off a question period completely opposed to talking about divesting investments from public assets, and then by the end was saying, I'll follow up on it and I'll do something about it. I guess you can't just keep the same line of questioning as well. But it's interesting to watch the provincial political dynamics on an international issue where a province doesn't really have a lot it can do, and yet there's a lot of talk, a lot of sizzle, not a lot of steak on an issue like this. So interesting. I want to move on to the second topic, which is COVID. And I mean, that's always the topic, and God help us, I hope we're not talking about COVID in a few weeks. But we had a briefing this week again with Dr. Bonnie Henry, who said we're moving to weekly data releases. We're not going to put numbers out every day about case counts, hospitalizations, deaths, as we transition to hopefully lifting vaccine cards and masks like other provinces in the weeks ahead. I kind of the mind, and I wrote a column about this, maybe we should just stop the briefings. I feel like they're a little bit like doom scrolling. You know, we're sitting there asking Dr. Henry questions about what if things get worse, and what if another variant comes up, and then, we haven't stopped to enjoy the moment of getting through this Omicron wave and the sacrifices that a lot of people made to get us there. And so I'm just kind of raising this point, and we'll go around and talk about it, about what do you guys think? Scrap these briefings, keep them? What should government and Dr. Henry consider about continuing to communicate with the public as we move through this fatigue and anxiety into a period of maybe some little bit more happiness as we go through that? Katie, why don't we start with you?
Yes, I think they should end the briefings. And while they're at it, I think they should end all existing restrictions too. At this point, this is performative nonsense and it's completely political. Every other province has restrictions removed by mid-March, and yet I just find in BC we seem to radiate this truly unmatched level of precious sanctimony and be the last ones to accept what is clearly inevitable. I want to talk about public polling here because I think that this is factoring into the decision making here. I think the NDP is probably doing public polling on COVID measures as every government across the country does. And I would bet money that they see the following. They see rural communities in the north and interior, aka BC Liberal seats, that want restrictions gone. And I would bet urban metropolitan centers like Vancouver and the lower mainland, they have a higher degree of risk aversion, particularly amongst women aged 25 to 44. And like, to be clear, like if you want to wear a mask, wear one. I don't care. I respect you. I respect your comfort level. But we need to collectively accept that we are moving to an endemic and give people their freedoms back. So my assessment on this entire issue is that it's capital P politics, which is driving these decisions, not science.
Freedoms. Why did you have to say freedoms?
It was for you, Rob. It's all
Oh man, freedoms. All right. Well, we'll just let that go. That's a trigger. You triggered me, but I'm going to let it go.
On purpose.
Jeff, what do you think?
Look, I couldn't disagree more with the assessment. You know, I worked as the executive director in health communications with Dr. Henry throughout this pandemic. And what I want briefings. I don't want a void of briefings. The pandemic is still with us. There are people still in hospitals. There are people dying every day. And I want for trusted, credible voices providing information about what's happening and what we can do to protect ourselves and our communities. And I like it from Dr. Henry and not from Joe Rogan, MD, right? And that's what's going to fill the void if we go down this route. The decisions made are done by public health based on science, based on a review of morbidity and hospitalizations and transmission. And their starting point is that restrictions are bad. Public health believes restrictions are bad for health, and they are looking for every opportunity to responsibly remove them. And if public health is saying, not yet, now's not the time, then we should take that seriously.
Yeah, I guess it's a good point that counters my argument that we should end the briefings, is that if we end them, and people still have questions or are anxious, they're going to go get that information filled by a bunch of wacko tinfoil hat conspiracy weirdos or F-grade medical professionals or somebody else who just happens to be out on Twitter trying to pump their tires. And I don't know if that's good. Maybe we have to have Dr. Henry there every week, just kind of like that wash your hands in the bathroom sign that no one looks at, but at the same time is good public health advice. I don't know. Maybe that's the counter. Maclean, what do you think? Well, I think Katy, we'll come around. We'll do it again. Maclean?
I think there's a good middle ground here in that
yes,
the problem with the briefings, I always have to bring the Goldilocks take, right?
You agree with everyone?
I am, because that's my whole gimmick here. Here's the thing. I can only speak to my own outlet, but I know from tracking things like clicks and downloads and listens that the people are increasingly tuning out these things. And it doesn't matter if Dr. Bonnie Henry and Adrian Dix are, doing briefings every single day. The reporters will still tune in because they have to, but the public has increasingly tuned them out. And so that's not to suggest that the information has to stop. Of course, it should still be reported on a daily or even more, if possible, basis on all the places we've learned to look. But if people aren't listening to the briefings anymore, it's kind of a waste of time, in my opinion, for Dr. Henry and the minister, who obviously have other things to do, and we don't want them. We talk about fatigue. I'm sure they feel it more than most. So if we suspend or make them less frequent, I think this is a good thing and would reflect the fact that the public just aren't paying attention anymore. Still report the data, still have something we can point to, but I just don't get the sense, again, speaking only from my own outlet, that people are paying attention to the numbers in any detail any longer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, maybe I've improperly kind of framed it as I said get rid of it entirely, and then, keeping some version of it, but not as frequent might be the middle ground here, like pop up every now and again to let us know how it's going or remind us. I think the problem is that it could all change again in the fall, right? That's what we've heard everyone say, is that the flu season, the respiratory season in the fall, another variant. I guess it's just how much do we want to talk about that while we're also so excited about removing our masks? And is anyone, like you said, Maclean, going to listen? Katy, let's go around again. What do What do you think after having a first round of this?
Look, so with regards to the briefings, I would say eliminate those unless Dr. Henry and Minister Dix need to go out to report that there's been a new subvariant, that there's a new concern. Maybe temper down the data release, do it 3 times a week, then 2 times a week, then once a week until it becomes hopefully irrelevant one day. On the politics piece, I'm not the one who is saying it's political. Dr. Henry herself said that this is science and also a little bit of politics. And whenever I hear a bureaucrat or a politician say it's just a little bit about politics, I can assure you that means it's entirely political, at least in my experience. So I think that what we need to also take into consideration here as we go into the endemic phase of COVID is that governments across this country and across the world need to start focusing in on the mental health anguish that has resulted from 2 years of lockdowns to a varying degree. And that's something that I would like to see a more concerted effort from public policy. In addition to that, we also have an overdose crisis that I would like to see the same care and attention that we just spent the last 2 years on dedicated to that path. It is high time that we bid close to COVID-19 and focus on some other essential key priorities that have unfortunately been ignored for far too long.
See, I 100% agree on the mental health thing and then the overdose thing for sure. On the politics thing, having talked to Dr. Henry throughout this pandemic, I know this triggers people, this idea there is politics and not some type of pure science, bar graph that we've run the pandemic on. But she's always been clear that part of her job is public health, convincing people to follow rules, designing rules based on what they're willing to do and not do. There is a small p politics involved in marshaling the public in a crisis that I don't think is wrong. It's not like partisan politics, like she's a card-carrying member of a party making ideological decisions. It's the politics of influencing public health. And so when she said that this week, I kind of thought, well, yes, I mean, part of this is science. Part of this is people's comfort level. Part of it is the realization that if you keep these rules in place, people are just not going to follow them anymore. And there's a political calculation on that. Jeff, I mean, you've been in the center of this storm. Am I wrong on what politics means when we start talking about it? Is it, or is it something else, do you think?
I think you would be, if you were in a room with Dr. Henry and you tried to make her say something because you thought that you needed to appeal to some kind of political factor, that would be the last time that you talk to Dr. Henry. She is very focused on the public health. She's very mindful of the powers that the Public Health Act give her to speak independently, and she bristles in an appropriate way, to anyone who even hints at political intervention and what should be public health and science-based decisions. I agree that these briefings don't need to be as frequently. I think they should be as frequent as the situation demands, and thank goodness, thanks to vaccination and the efforts of all British Columbians and all parties, we're in a much better place. I just think that they're in this kind of communication, if we stop communicating at a regular cadence, we run the risk of division and being unprepared for when the pandemic flares up the next time, and it will.
Yeah. Maclean, what do you think?
I think that, to be fair to Katy, it was Dr. Henry that used the word politics, and I agree with your and Jeff's interpretation of what she probably meant by that. But at the very least, we can agree that would not be the word that I would choose. It is a very loaded word, and that is how most people will interpret it. I guess what we're really saying is something more like sociology, but she said it. We have to have the conversation now, and I would hope we would be as generous if, I don't know, Scott Moe, Doug Ford, Jason Kenney, or their public health officers use that same word in that exact same context.
Yeah, none of their public health officers are talking anymore. It's all them as premiers. So you get to boot them around because they're politicians. Whereas we've discussed this on the show before, it's still our public health officer leading these briefings every week. Our premier hasn't chosen to go that route. And I assume we are going to see him this coming week when BC's set to announce the spring break kind of reopening plan, because he'll be front and center on that. I don't know, but you're right. It's different. We are doing it differently in BC. As the premier said, he thinks there's a large public appetite to do it that way, and that we're willing to be slightly out of alignment for a little bit. We're talking a series of weeks maybe where where we got rules in place that other provinces don't, and that's the calculation. And so far, I guess it's worked out for them. But just quickly, just kind of a hot take here at the end of the show. Dr. Henry announces, bang, you can take off your mask. I think we've asked this before. Who's comfortable doing that? Katie, I'm going to assume that, yeah, you're ready to go. You can take off your mask right now and walk into a restaurant, on spring break. Jeff, Maclean, you going to do it?
I will. I'm everything I just said is I actually have a lot of faith in her judgment. If she says it's fine tomorrow, I'm pretty fine. I know there are people in my circle who won't be fine, and I'm fine with that too.
Yep.
Yeah.
What do you think?
In the right situation, outside, places where the vaccine card's in place, low risk situations, absolutely. I'm probably going to be a little bit slower than most, and I think it's okay for people to, wherever they are on this, to do what makes them comfortable and feel safe.
100%.
Yeah. I'll keep mine on because I look really good with a mask, I think. Which is mostly covers up this beard I've been trying to grow for 40 years. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. So we will be back next week. There's a lot going on at the legislature. There's a bunch of bills. There's still budget debate going on. There is going to be the big COVID briefing. There's tons of things going on in BC politics. Make sure if you're checking us out on the Check Plus app, you can get all sorts of free back episodes of the show. Subscribe on your favorite podcast feed or here on Check on Sunday evenings. And you want to stick around, Mo Amir's This Is Van Color is coming up next as well. So you want to stick around for that. Thank you so much for watching. And thank you, Jeff, for being here this week. Thank you for the panel for being here. We will see you next week on Political Capital.
Find more episodes of Political Capital at checknews.ca/podcasts, wherever you find podcasts, or on Check Plus.